There's this episode of The Simpsons called The Springfield Connection, which is about Marge becoming a police officer.
I'm interested in becoming a police officer.
Welcome aboard.
What follows is, mostly, gags about how corrupt and ineffectual Springfield's police are, occasionally bordering on genuine criticism of the US's criminal justice system.
Mom, I know your intentions are good, but aren't the police a protective force that maintains the status quo for the wealthy elites? Don't you think we ought to attack the roots of social problems instead of jamming people into overcrowded prisons?
Look, Lisa, it's McGriff, the crime dog.
But it's also compelling character development for Marge.
Sometimes ordinary people get a surge of adrenaline. Ooh. See?
She takes to the job very naturally, becoming more adept at it than her colleagues and proving herself capable of things we wouldn't normally expect of her. And then, the episode ends like this.
That's it. There's too much corruption on this force. I quit.
Sorry to lose you, Simpson.
This comes as no surprise, of course. The Simpsons employs a traditional sitcom format, in that any deviations from the status quo are undone before the episode is finished, or else outright forgotten by the next episode. This format was a staple in the days when broadcast TV was all there was. It avoids alienating viewers who might not have tuned in the previous week, and makes for easy syndication, as episodes can be repeated out of sequence. But, as the Springfield Connection proves, it also limits the ways characters can develop and change. I'm not saying The Simpsons might have been improved if Marge had remained a police officer, but I've always found it a little jarring that such a transformative experience had no long-term impact on her character. I like the implication that she's a homemaker by choice rather than necessity, but the abruptness of the ending makes this choice a little unconvincing, merely mandated by the format. Marge's decision to quit is supported by scenes about feeling distanced from her old friends and how skills from her former life become unexpectedly useful.
Every mother knows the secret entrance to her son's treehouse.
But it doesn't resolve the problem that led Marge to join the police in the first place. She felt unfulfilled and craved excitement. So even though I know this plot is over and done with, when I watch later episodes, I can't help but wonder if she still feels this way. The longer a show goes on, the more incongruities like this are likely to occur. The Simpsons has entered its third decade on the air, and while it's showing no signs of dying, its health has certainly deteriorated. It's become harder to tell stories about these characters that feel like they matter. This family is so preserved in amber, there's even an episode that time slips Homer and Marge's history out of the 80s and into the 90s.
We should follow the lead of today's celebrity role models.
The characters are not permitted to age, so history must reform around them. Today, they feel less like people and more like archetypes that can be retrofitted for whatever purpose. But why should anyone care what an archetype feels? By contrast, The Venture Brothers is an animated comedy with very strong continuity. Not only does it have a narrative that progresses episode to episode, but even offhand remarks are liable to return as plot points several seasons down the line.
Off, it's on, it's off, it's on, off, it's on.
That's called blinking, boys.
A joke about the twins' stupidity in the first season becomes significant in the 7th.
It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, off.
I tried to communicate with them. They mustn't teach the cadets Morse code anymore.
A joke prophecy made by Dr. Orpheus
2 years, 17 days. From a stroke.
Comes to fruition right on schedule.
Toast! What's wrong with you?
Oh my god, you having a heart attack?
A stroke.
A joke about a side character's backstory
Why'd you join up?
You guys kidnapped me when I was 15.
remains true even after he is developed to have a more significant role.
Now, because I was a huge kid, and because henchmen don't do that much research, I got kidnapped instead of Senator Nighthorse Campbell.
In other shows, these sorts of throwaway gag are usually, as the name implies, disposable. If the plot or characters develop in ways the writers hadn't anticipated and end up contradicting something mentioned in a gag, well, that wouldn't be a big problem. Chances are, most of the audience won't even remember some random lines from several seasons past, and those that do will probably understand that these were just jokes, and not meant to be taken seriously. However, in the Venture Brothers, even the most minor details have permanent consequences for the characters. It creates the impression of a wider world beyond what we're shown, that each character has a life and a history that matters, that everything the characters experience, think, and feel, even when it's only serving a joke, is real to them. For the Venture Brothers, humour and plot are not separate things, but work in tandem. Now, I'm not saying stronger continuity is necessarily better, especially where sitcoms are concerned, but when continuity is ignored, it blunts a story's impact. There's only so much an audience can invest in what's happening now, if they know it's not going to matter by next week. The more we see characters fail to be affected by the things they experience, the less we care about what happens to them, which can harm comedy just as much as narrative. If the characters don't behave authentically, if the plots feel contrived, if we can tell that all of this exists just to try and make us laugh, it simply becomes less funny.
The more real you can make a comedy, the funnier it's going to be. Instead of making faces and doing funny sounds and all of that.
Sitcoms rely on selling a situation. If the situation doesn't feel real, at least to the characters living in it, why should anyone care? So, having said all this, let's talk about Rick and Morty.
Okay, you can change it.
You feel it?
Rick and Morty is an adult animated sitcom about Rick, an alcoholic sociopathic mad scientist, who goes on interdimensional space adventures with his hapless grandson, Morty, who is subjected to perilous and traumatic experiences as a result.
Oh jeez, Rick!
It is the brainchild of creators Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon. The two have a long history of working together. Roiland has performed on the Sarah Silverman program and created content for Channel 101 and Acceptable TV, all three of which were co-created by Harmon. Even so, their creative styles are quite different.
Roiland, who describes himself as more like a Jim Henson type, is a free associating yes-and of a person, a fast-talking counterbalance to Harmon's perfectionism and his reluctance to accept good enough, a phrase Harmon associates with just giving up.
Outside of Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland is best known as a performer, voice acting in particular, including voicing both the leads in Rick and Morty. But he also has a background in comedy shorts, particularly animation. These shorts have a frenetic, improvisational style with crude and absurd humour.
Alright, that's it! Shut the fuck up! I'm getting sick of it! I got a fucking gun!
By contrast, Dan Harmon is...
Do you understand what it's like to be a genius?
He's a screenwriter for film and television, most notable for his previous sitcom, Community. He is known for subverting tropes, deconstructive meta-humor, genre pastiches, and breaking the fourth wall.
This is the movie.
Harmon is a big proponent of structure. He's written at length about his story circle approach, a reinterpretation of Campbell's hero's journey, in which any story can be broken down into 8 distinct steps. Rick and Morty is the first project Roiland and Harmon have written together, and both their influences can be keenly felt in the show. It is directly inspired by a number of Roiland's animated shorts. Not so much the content, which is so vulgar, Roiland was afraid the executive producers would cancel Rick and Morty during pre-production if they ever saw it, but rather the characters. And there are elements throughout Roiland's, let's call it, oeuvre, that have also been incorporated into the show, from side characters and voices to jokes and even the theme music. Nevertheless, Rick and Morty is much more structured than these shorts, which is largely down to Harmon's influence. Each episode is written in accordance with Harmon's story circle, to have a more satisfying story-like shape. While the show is known for taking a silly idea and running with it to its most absurd extreme, these extremes can still be resolved with an underpinning logic.
What the hell? I figured it out, Rick! The parasites can only create pleasant memories!
How did you?
Well, I had a feeling that in your mind, the ideal version of me is one smart enough to see you as a goddess.
Now, I don't want to characterize Harmon and Roiland as being at odds with each other. Harmon has run an improvised podcast, and Roiland has done solo screenwriting work, so I doubt their creative relationship is purely order versus chaos. That said, it does seem that Harmon tends to pull the show towards structure.
We can have Rick and Morty go on these adventures together as grandfather and grandson, and then we can intercut it with these Charlie Kaufman, Woody Allen-esque petty domestic squabbles that are happening. That will be the formula of the show.
Whereas Roiland pushes it towards spontaneity.
I started acting out saying I wanted to do something fun. I was sick of these boring, complex stories, and I just wanted to have fun. I started screaming, "I'm Mr. Meeseeks!" And we started the concept from there.
Generally speaking, the show is a marriage of these two influences, which I feel is a large part of its success. But when it comes to continuity, these two styles are not quite so complementary. Continuity requires structure and limits spontaneity. Investing in continuity may help create a believable world and characters, but the more a story is rooted in its own past, the harder it is to venture off into unexplored frontiers. Rick and Morty wants to do both of these things, which might explain why the show's approach to continuity hasn't always been very consistent. Let's review. In his thesis on the story circle, Dan Harmon writes a whole section on how it should be applied to TV. The main difference is, instead of being changed, the hero must undo any changes before the story's end.
A feature film's job is to send you out of the theatre on a high in 90 minutes. Television's job is to keep you glued to the television for your entire life. The trick that television plays is that it swaps out any meaningful and therefore potentially television-subverting truth with the basic eternal truth that change is unnecessary. Uninspiring? Yes, but the joy of TV is in the moment. TV isn't selling revolution, it's selling a hygienic, relatable substitution for your own filthy, unmarketable humanity.
Which, in rather emphatic terms, makes the point that change limits longevity. If characters change, they risk completing their arc. If a problem is resolved, it brings the story closer to a conclusion. And if you want a sitcom to last, changing the situation risks breaking the whole thing. Rick and Morty is no different.
Roiland also said that while other animated shows have to be aware of story arcs and character lists, he and Harmon intentionally made their show not bound by rules.
Well, it depends what rules you mean, Justin. Because the first season of Rick and Morty is pretty formulaic. Each episode is a self-contained adventure, with an A plot and a B plot, both of which are resolved by the end, leaving no significant changes to the status quo. Each one adheres to the traditional sitcom structure, which is so well hewn by this point, you can get templates that are broken down minute by minute. And that is more liberating than you might expect. When Roiland says the show is not bound by rules, he's talking about the freedom to do wacky off-the-wall hijinks without worrying about narrative restrictions. Rick and Morty can do this because Harmon's story circle and the traditional sitcom format are designed to avoid continuity inconspicuously, which means any episode can be about anything, without worrying about how this might affect other episodes. And this is further enhanced by the show's sci-fi premise. With the aid of Rick's homemade spaceship and portal gun, the duo can travel anywhere in an infinite multiverse of alternate dimensions. Aside from outlandish worlds and alien species, this multiverse also contains an infinite number of alternate Earths, with other versions of Rick, Morty, and the entire Smith family. These alternate Smiths range from entirely unrecognizable to functionally indistinguishable. So, if your world is merely one of an infinite number of identical copies, your reality becomes disposable. Any consequence of your actions become insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Every person you know or love becomes lost in a never-ending crowd of identical copies. Your entire existence will never truly matter. Which means Rick and Morty can take an idea to its breaking point and still have a safety line back to the status quo. For example, take episode 6, Rick Potion number 9, in which Rick accidentally transforms nearly everyone in the world into hideous abominations.
You gotta fix finish this, Rick? All right, Morty. You know, we are in a pretty deep hole here, but I do have one emergency solution that I can use that'll kind of put everything back to normal, relatively speaking.
The solution is to travel to an almost identical parallel world, in which the disaster has already been averted. The Rick and Morty of this universe have unexpectedly perished, meaning our Rick and Morty can secretly replace them.
What about the reality we left behind? What about the reality where Hitler cured cancer, Morty? The answer is don't think about it.
It's a cop-out ending, but that's part of the joke. Everything has changed, yet nothing is different. Morty must carry on as normal, whilst harrowed by the knowledge of what he and Rick have done. The Smith family we've seen undergo significant change in this episode are discarded, replaced by a new Smith family that is identical, but without the burden of this episode's events. It may as well not have happened. Sure, it suggests an impact on Morty's character, that from now on, even though he hides it, his very reality is alien to him. But this need never be referenced again. We can continue business as usual. And now the show has an established mechanism to reset the status quo no matter how badly it's upended. Roiland has named this episode his favourite of the season, specifically because of how
insane it gets at the end,
reaffirming that he prioritizes comedic freedom over the limitations a stricter narrative might impose. And yet, only 2 episodes later, the show does reference this again.
That out there? That's my grave.
Morty convinces Summer not to run away from home by telling her what he and Rick did and how this has affected his outlook.
So, you're not my brother?
I'm better than your brother. I'm a version of your brother you can trust when he says don't run. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV.
So, what might have been a complete dismissal of continuity ends up being the very opposite. It becomes a crucial plot point when Summer and Morty dig up the dead Rick's body to steal his portal gun. Morty's original world is shown to still exist, where his original family continue to live without him. The fact that Rick and Morty live in a reality which is not their own repeatedly influences their actions.
You love your grandkids. You came to rescue them. I came to kill you, bro. That's not even my original Summer.
Oh my god, he's not bluffing. He's not bluffing!
So it turns out the characters do remember previous episodes and are changed by their past experiences. We probably shouldn't have taken Harmon and Roiland entirely at their word before. One only has to look at Harmon's previous sitcom Community to see he does value continuity.
Good shows change, I assume. Personally, I don't own a TV.
The show has overarching plot lines, running gags, cast changes. Time passes visibly, to the point the show starts running out of excuses why the characters remain at the college despite having graduated.
Being with you guys is great, but why is this a good choice for me? Why doesn't the audience feel sorry for me?
So while Harmon may believe that change is anathema to TV, it's clear he also recognizes that in order to create a sense of authenticity, continuity is necessary.
It's really weird in animation because obviously Morty has to be 14 forever, Summer is 17 forever, Rick is whatever he is forever. So that question becomes like, do your characters grow and change? I'm firmly against that reset button hitting where there is no awareness of the present. I look at it as like smoking meat versus cooking. You kind of let the flavour of itself happen, and let that change things.
And while it's surely true that Roiland favours a more random, unconventional approach to storytelling, his sequential shorts, such as Mr. Sprinkles or the poorly aged House of Cosby's, do have an overarching narrative. They're aimless, making-it-up-as-we-go sort of plots, but once a character or idea is introduced, it is remembered and expanded upon in future episodes. Which is what Rick and Morty does too.
You just gotta push forward. And I think the lesson ahead of us is that some degree of pushing forward is going to involve, callbacks are gonna happen naturally.
As the show progresses into its second season, it increasingly builds on its continuity. For instance, the Gromflamites are an insectoid alien species that appear in the pilot as Customs security. When a future episode needs a cop character, it's simply economical to reuse that design, which then makes narrative sense to develop this species as representing an authoritarian outer space government, becoming one of the show's most prominent antagonists. And they're just one of several recurring side characters who evolve each time they return. What's more, there's incredible attention to even the most minor of background details. The time the Smith house was teleported to another dimension leaves a permanent crack in the driveway. The alien parasites which infect the family can be seen on the green rocks Rick collects 2 episodes prior. A number of Jerry's adventures are referenced in the form of mementos he's kept. And Mr. Meeseeks appears in the background of Blips and Chits, doing what Meeseeks do best. So while the broad setup of the show might not change, it uses continuity in very specific ways, to make their characters feel like they are genuinely impacted by their experiences, and to create the impression of an authentic universe that exists beyond what we're shown. Which, for Rick and Morty, might have been a mistake. The show's gradual accumulation of continuity reaches its peak when a side gag evolves into a full-blown narrative. At a party in Season 1, Summer's high school friend Tammy hooks up with Rick's friend, a half-bird, half-person named Birdperson. Halfway through Season 2, we see they've moved in together, and the Season 2 finale takes place at their wedding, culminating in the season's dramatic conclusion.
You know, in a lot of ways, I'm not a high school senior from the planet Earth. In a lot of ways, what I really am is a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation, and you guys are a group of wanted criminals, and this entire building is, in a certain sense, surrounded.
Birdperson! No!
Season 2 ends in a massive cliffhanger. Rick is in a maximum security prison, Earth is under the control of the Galactic Federation, and even the perennially unemployed Jerry gets a job. Naturally, all of this is walked back immediately in Season 3. Rick takes down the Federation from the inside, Earth goes back to normal, and Jerry's job is destroyed. Which isn't unexpected. As we've seen, the broad setup of the show cannot change. But then, all this stuff is just window dressing to what the story is really about. Rick's relationship with his family.
Why are we doing this? For someone that would never do anything for anyone but himself.
That's not the point, Dad! We love Rick! For the most part.
Yeah, you don't love people in hopes of a reward, Dad. You love them unconditionally. That's very good, kids.
And on that front, there are huge consequences.
Beth, it's him or me.
Jerry's going to spend some time divorced.
So while the Season 3 premiere reasserts some sense of normality, it does not dismiss the dramatic weight of the cliffhanger. This status quo is different from the old one, and the season goes on to explore the narrative opportunities the change presents. The characters have to adjust. There's a real sense that time is passing, and the Smiths are moving, not forward, because that suggests they're changing in positive ways, but still moving in some direction away from where they started. And then the season ends by putting everything back as it was in the beginning.
We're a real family now. In many ways, things will be like Season 1, but more streamlined.
My issue with this is not that Beth and Jerry get back together, that's fine. It's that the way it's handled feels very rushed. The bulk of the final episode is about a petty rivalry between Rick and the US president. Beth and Jerry's reconciliation is the B-plot, which only takes precedence in the last few minutes. And, okay, there's a sort of thematic link. In both stories, Rick must learn he cannot be both all-powerful and a part of the family. But considering the high-stakes drama that got us into this situation, this conclusion is pretty limp. It all happens so quickly, it doesn't feel like the characters are behaving authentically as themselves, a point which even goes remarked upon.
Now Jerry and I are happily married parents, and the idea that I was motivated by a fear of you leaving can be eschewed.
Eschewed? You've never used that word. Maybe you are a clone.
Framing this not only as a reunion, but as a reset, flies in the face of what this show has been doing all this time. Wasn't the whole point to build on continuity? In fairness, this season's ending probably isn't the one Roiland and Harmon had in mind. It's only episode 10 of what was planned to be a season of 14. Production was behind schedule due to writing delays, which put undue pressure on the animators and resulted in the series being cut short. Early drafts of this episode were about Rick and the President fighting ISIS werewolves, and, it appears, not about Beth and Jerry at all. It's likely the idea for this episode was not actually intended to be the finale, but had to be redrafted for that purpose, which would explain why it feels rushed and disjointed.
The reason Season 3 took long is because it took long to write, because it was Season 3 of a show that we were scared to make worse than Season 2 or Season 1. It's a common yet odd phenomenon. Tail-chasing, perfectionism, overthinking. It's just another good season of Rick and Morty that took way too long to write, because it just seems like the same stuff that took way less time to write.
Rick and Morty was an overnight hit. Season 3 received Adult Swim's highest ever ratings. It's garnered a huge and often intense following with a voracious appetite. It's perfectly understandable the creative team felt pressured to maintain the show's previous standard. And maybe pressure is all it was, but I do find it a little telling this coincided with the decision to reset the characters, and to begin season 4 like this.
From now on, Rick and Morty doing a little of this and a little of that.
Yeah, sometimes we'll do classic stuff, other times we'll do whatever.
Sometimes we won't even do anything.
The fact they take a hard turn away from any overarching narrative makes me wonder if their approach to continuity was part of the problem. Season 3 had the difficult task of resolving the show's most dramatic cliffhanger, one that fans had been sitting with for a year and a half. To maintain the sense of continuity, they had to make that cliffhanger feel like it mattered, whilst at the same time restoring some normal order of business for wacky random adventures. For the most part, I think Season 3 succeeds at this, but it doesn't surprise me it was harder to write. The cliffhanger swerved the show closer to narrative and structure, which surely made it harder to incorporate Roiland's signature spontaneity.
The more I look at it with a fresher mind, it's like Justin was right and I was wrong in the Season 3 writer's room. Because Justin was the voice of, let's move forward, and I was the voice of, I don't think this is quite right yet.
So, the reset is a course correction to prevent these delays from happening in future. And it's worked. They've never been behind schedule since. But after all the effort they've put into using continuity to make this universe feel authentic, reducing continuity runs the risk of breaking that illusion. The show's adherence to continuity first begins to show cracks towards the end of Season 3. There's a tradition of sorts that each season has an anthology episode, a clip show of unrelated sketches knitted together with a loose theme. For the first 2 seasons, these came in the form of interdimensional cable. The in-story logic is that Rick can tune a TV to receive every channel across the multiverse, and the clip show is just him and the family channel hopping. This gives Roiland the freedom to improvise skits in the recording booth, often while drunk.
Alright, forget it. Forget me. I'm drunk.
But also compartmentalizes them away from the main narrative and characters. But in Season 3, the anthology episode does involve the main characters.
I call them Morty's Mind Blowers, and we'll be doing this instead of interdimensional cable.
The episode reveals that Rick has been erasing Morty's memories every time he experiences something too traumatic to cope with. And the clip show is Rick using the machine to show off some of his favorites to Morty, just for kicks, I suppose.
It's not a Simpsons Halloween special, more like a clip show made of clips you never saw.
Which already makes the continuity a little wobbly, just by the implications. How can we know for sure Morty still remembers every episode before this one?
What's the point of going on if most of everything that happens just ends up sitting in here?
Does it affect his ability for character development?
How many of these are just horrible mistakes I've made? I mean, maybe I'd stop making so many if I let myself learn from them.
And what about the rest of the family, whose memories haven't been erased? Are they not affected by these events? If everyone has a different recollection of things, isn't that going to cause problems later on?
Don't break your back creating a lesson, Morty. It's a free-form anthology. I'm getting annoyed you're not hearing that.
Okay, fine. I'd be happy to accept this in the spirit it's given and just ignore all the ramifications moving forward. Except...
You with squirrels, Morty! We got a good 5 minutes before they're backing up on our ass, Morty! We have to pack up and move to a new reality, Morty! I said we could only do that a couple of times!
Last time, this mattered. Last time, changing realities had a psychological impact on the characters and a physical impact on the universe they left behind. Rick may have told Morty not to think about it, but last time, the writers did think about it. So to tell us it's happened again, at some indeterminate point in the past which Morty doesn't even remember, in the form of a throwaway gag about squirrels that is never referenced again, rather undermines all that. Season 4 reverts to entirely self-contained episodes, taking full advantage of the reset to explore ideas which are more absurd, without having to think about what it's trying to say with them.
Did we at least learn something?
That we suck and everyone sucks?
I guess that counts.
There isn't no continuity in Season 4, but what little there is doesn't really matter in the way it used to. Older episodes are referenced, but not in a way that feels like the characters have been impacted by them.
I guess you wanted a dragon? Unforgettable.
Some familiar characters come back, but not in ways that feel like they have history. The last time we saw Nancy, she scolded Summer for being a bad friend and left. Now, for one scene only, she's friends with Summer again, enduring the same old abuse.
Also later, we need to discuss your clothing and your weight.
That's fair.
The show hasn't just backed away from continuity, it's become outright dismissive of it.
He's a free young man, and as far as continuity goes, the reset button's been hit.
We don't need to try so hard, you know? Let's just take it easy and riff, you know? Stop asking questions, stop doing meta commentary. Just have fun.
Gotta love it when your TV show tells you how you should enjoy it. Another subtle but significant change is how the show breaks the fourth wall. These breaks are hardly new, but aside from one or two minor exceptions, they've always been made by Rick.
We'll be right back after these messages.
This can be interpreted as Rick's galaxy brain intelligence allowing him to perceive his reality in a way the other characters can't.
Hey, what are you doing?
A sequel.
I don't understand.
Yeah, me neither. We pretty much nailed it the first time.
Which allows Rick to draw attention to the artifice without breaking it. That is, until, as we've already seen, Beth does it very overtly at the end of Season 3.
In many ways, things will be like Season 1.
And in Season 4, Morty and Summer start to do it as well.
Working together is our belt.
That's our arc, let's do it.
If any character is able to draw attention to the way they've been written, it just makes us more aware that someone has written them. It seems like the writers have stopped caring about whether this story feels authentic. And, as if to avoid any and all doubt about that, there's the story train.
It's not a real train, it's a story device. Literally. A literal, literary device, quite literally, metaphorically containing us.
Season 4's anthology episode takes place on an outer space train in which each carriage contains stories about Rick and Morty. It's basically an excuse to make metatextual jokes about narrative structure. Emergency canisters of continuity disrupt the narrative flow when they explode. Going outside the train recontextualizes the story as a story within a story. The train is even shaped like Harmon's story circle.
I don't like how meta this is getting, Rick.
Shut up, Morty.
It's all a bit too clever for its own good. It just draws even more attention to the fiction. By the end, it's not clear if any of it actually happened, and, as a kicker, it seems to be actively hostile to the very idea of continuity. Rick and Morty are placed in a machine that steals their narrative potential. We see a series of possible futures which the episode tells us will now never happen.
Wait, is any of this canon?
It could have been!
These clips feature many classic characters in scenarios where their stories might be continued, and then says they won't be. It's like the show is responding to fans incessantly asking when their favourite characters will return by saying, never stop asking. Harmon has made his aversion to sequels very clear.
Do you know how many adventures we could get out of Purge Planet, Morty? Gear World? I don't sequel, it's called integrity.
And I get it. Just because people really enjoyed Snuffles the cyborg dog asking Summer where his testicles are, doesn't mean there's enough material there to warrant another episode about him. That said, it's disappointing to see Tammy and Birdperson here too. The last time we saw them was in a post-credit stinger back in Season 3, where Tammy reanimated Birdperson as a cyborg.
I am Phoenix Person.
Phoenix Person. Is that what we settled on? I thought we all agreed on Cyberbird.
And I get that this was a joke about dumb superhero sequel bait, and may not have been intended to be taken seriously. But these characters represented the show's most prominent story arc. There are interesting dramatic opportunities to be had by keeping them around. Birdperson's death was significant. It's only natural to assume his rebirth is too. So to tell us that the show is no longer interested in these characters, in a joke which seems to be at the fans' expense, is pretty aggravating. But then, I guess, more fool me for thinking an episode that told me not to care about continuity would actually impact the continuity.
Birdperson?
It is now Phoenix Person.
In the Season 4 finale, Tammy and Birdperson do come back. Their plotline is picked up, those dramatic opportunities are explored. And it's fine. The finale is fine. You know what? The whole season is fine. But fine is all it is. I can't muster up any more enthusiasm than that. The season ends with a moment of genuine sincerity, as Rick reflects on his failures as a father. The show has done sincerity before, a failed suicide, a self-sacrifice, a murdered friend, and these moments have always felt earned. But this time, it doesn't. After a season that spent the bulk of its time telling me not to care, surprise, surprise, I don't anymore. So here we are. Season 5 has just wrapped. and it's made a harder swing into continuity than the show ever has before.
You probably don't remember.
Check out Season 1, Episode 9, Rickheads. Excelsior!
A continuation of Birdperson's story, complete with character-defining exposition and sequel bait. A continuation of Evil Morty's story, which ties together all his previous appearances in a logical and considered way. A solidification of Rick's backstory, something the show has long since resisted clarifying. And, most daringly, Rick addresses the toxicity in his relationship with Morty and takes responsibility for it. Something that could upset the status quo beyond what a reality switch can fix.
I will never be the same.
If anything, it's too much continuity. The final 3 episodes barrel through momentous character moments without giving them much room to breathe. Morty rattles between hating Rick utterly and loving him unconditionally. We never see the family's reaction to Rick's departure, and he returns without properly addressing the reason he left. Seconds later, they're at the Citadel almost on a whim. There are good and fun ideas here, and the ending is pretty strong, but all of this doesn't really mesh together. Speaking of which, this dramatic conclusion is not supported by anything in the season that preceded it. It's just more disconnected random adventures. At best, they're fine. At worst...
I spent a week pleasuring myself with animal equipment and my sperm got turned into monsters on accident because I kept lying about it!
An armada of monsters created from Morty's sperm make a giant incest baby that is launched into space. And there are horse people for some reason. It's a pitch that sounds like a parody of Rick and Morty. But what offends me far more than the content is the lazy plotting. Pointing out you've written a Deus Ex Machina doesn't make it any less of a Deus Ex Machina.
That was easy.
If the sperm episode happened in a show that had never been interested in continuity, I might be more forgiving of it. We could just forget it and move on. But in Rick and Morty, this could matter in future. In fact, it does, only 3 episodes later, when the incest baby inexplicably returns. Why did this idea deserve continuity? It is not only difficult to believe the sperm episode and the finale are part of the same season, but part of the same show. The types of story they're trying to tell, as well as the problems they have in telling them, are diametric opposites. Now, I can already hear people telling me I'm overthinking this. Rick and Morty is just a dumb comedy show. It's not meant to be enjoyed on any level beyond that. And you know what? Fair. There's plenty of people who get stoned and watch Rick and Morty for something to giggle at. And power to them, I say. There's nothing wrong with enjoying something dumb just for the fun of it. Nevertheless, some of the show's most committed fans watch it because they think the show is far from dumb.
To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand Rick and Morty.
I do not care how many times the trolls of this group spam the popular "you need a high IQ" post with sarcastic and mocking intent. You act as a hive mind, flock of Jerrys, if you will, who envy the smart-minded, wishing to become one of us.
Some of these fans get very defensive when you call the show dumb, arguing that, in fact, we are the dumb ones, too dumb to appreciate how smart it is. This toxic area of the fandom is a whole other thing I don't really want to get into, but it does speak to the show's reputation for being more intelligent than its contemporaries.
Beyond the wild humour, Rick and Morty offers a truly intelligent take on the age-old question, why are we here?
So, is the show smart, or is it dumb? Often, it's both. For instance, this is dumb.
I turned myself into a pickle, Morty! Boom! Big reveal, I'm a pickle!
Whereas an allegory about alcoholism is smart.
You are the master of your universe, and yet you are dripping with rat blood and feces, your enormous mind literally vegetating by your own hand.
Get it? He's pickled. For an idea that was pitched off the cuff in the writer's room, this episode does an impressive job of using it to cut right into the core of Rick's dysfunctions. It was this sort of thing that enamored me to this show in the first place. That it could do silly, absurd humour whilst also making it mean something. That it could delight you with farce, only to pull away the veil and reveal a sincere emotion beneath. Much like Rick himself, while the show professed not to care, it secretly cared very much. But as it's gone on, the show keeps changing its mind about that. Now, Rick and Morty can't tell a ridiculous joke without raising long-term implications. It can't explore narrative consequences without changing the show into something it doesn't want to be. It can't be serious without constantly poking fun at itself.
Dead wife?
Yes, now everyone can shut up about it.
The show's two guiding principles of absurd fun and surprising depth are increasingly in conflict. Looking back, even the pickle episode suffers the same identity crisis. It does have insightful things to say about alcoholism, yes, but the bulk of the episode is an action survival story, which is entertaining but says nothing on the broader theme. And that's really what the episode is remembered for. It's certainly what the show thinks we remember.
Worse than when I was a pickle? Oh, that's right, you weren't there for that. Turns out kind of cool.
Which rather sends a mixed message if the point is supposed to be an indictment of alcoholism. Doesn't this just make it look rad? For the most part, this episode is really just an exercise in whether or not such a dumb concept can work as a story. And sure, it does. Here's an Emmy. But the truth is, this episode is not both dumb and smart. It's too much of each to be either. Which is becoming increasingly true for the show as a whole. Season 5 ends with the suggestion that Rick and Morty are now on a more equal footing. Maybe. It's not clear what the fallout of the ending might be. If they go right back to their previous dysfunctions, it'll feel pretty dismissive of the emotional beats they've experienced. Nevertheless, that dysfunction was the main fuel for the show's plot and comedy. I tend to prefer shows that embrace change, but won't a change this big lead to similar writing delays that Season 3 suffered? I'm interested in where the show will go next, but only academically. I'm not as invested as I once was. And while early reaction to the finale seems positive, this season has received the show's lowest ratings, so I don't think I'm the only one. The characters feel less authentic, the world feels less believable, the comedy feels more deliberate. So even if they keep riding this sudden renewed interest in continuity into Season 6 and beyond, I don't think that will win me back. The damage has already been done. Alongside Rick and Morty, Roiland has created another sitcom, Solar Opposites, this time collaborating with Mike McMahan of Star Trek Lower Decks fame. Solar Opposites, which tells the story of a group of aliens who crash land on Earth and have to live as an ordinary family, is like Rick and Morty in a lot of ways. It's a sci-fi, it has a similar animation style, and naturally has Roiland's brand of off-the-wall humour, which makes it a useful example for comparison. What is Roiland's writing like without Dan Harmon? And what has he learned from Rick and Morty? Judging by its first two seasons, Solar Opposites has a more confident notion of how it wants to handle continuity. Largely, it doesn't. There are one or two continuity nods, specifically the return of Corvo's Red Goobler. Don't ask, it'll take too long to explain. But aside from that, the show doesn't tell an overarching narrative. It's more than willing to subject its setting to natural disasters or death robots without thinking about the consequences. It has the freedom to take ideas to unexpected places whilst making continuity the butt of the joke. And all the characters are capable of breaking the fourth wall right from the beginning.
Now the story isn't about camp or being lost in the woods, it's about surviving in the big city.
Yeah, or it could be a Godzilla story, so keep your eyes open.
Okay, I have a ton of notes.
It's very clear the show isn't trying to be smart, it just wants to have fun. And while that's not so much to my taste, this feels more confident than when Rick and Morty has attempted the same lately. I already know what to expect. But then there's the wall.
Oh my god, what is this place?
The alien children have a habit of shrinking people they don't like and keeping them as pets, living inside a human terrarium within their bedroom wall. At least once per episode, there'll be a scene catching up with what's going on in the wall. And once per season, there'll be an episode that focuses on it entirely. Here, the show does have continuity. Much like how Interdimensional Cable compartmentalized Roiland's improvised skits away from the narrative, the wall compartmentalizes its narrative away from Solar Opposites' usual anything-goes approach.
The stakes for the Solars are comedic, and they reset every episode like a sitcom. It's fun for us to juxtapose a heavily serialized story within a sitcom. The stakes in the wall have to have a permanence, and they have to be dramatic.
The power struggles within the wall is an ongoing narrative that spans the entire season. Everything that happens has permanent consequences for the people who live there. It's still a comedy, but it's treated much more seriously than the stories about the lead characters, which is a joke in and of itself. The one thing that matters in this show is so small, literally, it can have no impact on the broader world. Even so, the wall is the part of the show which is celebrated most. It's easy to imagine a version of Solar Opposites without the wall, and yet, it was a big part of Roiland and McMahon's original pitch to Hulu. It's always been in the show. Because as much as continuity may get in the way of the type of humour Roiland prefers, it's clear he still recognises what it is useful for. The wall is the part of the show that fans are most invested in. It's what they talk about. It's what keeps them coming back. Whether this is a more sustainable method of combining irreverence and meaningful drama, only time will tell. What is clear is that some degree of continuity is necessary to create a story audiences care about, even for an irreverent comedy. However, as we've seen, continuity invites change, and change limits longevity. But why does longevity have to be the goal? If a story gets close to its natural ending, would it really be so bad if it just ended? After Season 3, Rick and Morty was renewed for 70 more episodes, a number which will bring the total to 101, one more than the amount traditionally required for syndication. And I don't blame Harmon and Roiland going for the cushy syndication deal, or even just trying to keep working on a show they like. But I can't help but wonder if the writing delays would still have happened if they weren't trying to resist the effects of continuity. Embracing change might have shortened the show's lifespan, but at least it would have retained that authenticity I used to love about it, a quality I dare say was instrumental in its success. Instead, we still have 50 episodes to go, and it feels like a long road. Because no matter how funny or inventive or sincere your ideas are, that won't matter in the slightest if you don't give your audience a solid reason why they should care. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel, you can join my Patreon for early releases and behind-the-scenes content. You can also donate to my Ko-fi, or follow me on Twitter @JamesB Woodall. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.